They're very, very clever people, very intelligent people, brilliant people who did post on these sites. I'm sad to say they were in a minority. And if you follow the history of what's happened to Richard Dawkins' site, if you know about the scandal that struck his site last year, and I'm at the origin of it, if you know about how his site imploded before getting changed, you will know that all this filth and hate and bile which was directed against Christians due to an unfortunate set of circumstances got directed against Richard Dawkins, and strangely...
You need to flesh this out, because most people don't know this ever happened.
Flesh this out?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say words like flesh? I'm sorry, cultural differences. I'm just trying to understand, you know. I didn't know I was allowed to say flesh. Yeah, well...
I mean fetish this out. That's what
you mean?
Fetish.
You need to fetish this out. That's what you mean.
Is he for real? No, I'll explain that to you later, because that's perhaps important. Because what happened before that is even more important, let's face it. And so every day I would get up and I would open the site and I'd go into the discussions to see if anybody replied to me, see if anybody got any new ideas. And there were some very interesting things being said, some extremely interesting things being said. Then one day, somebody put on the site a link to a book called the Dawkins Letters. Not this edition, this is the second edition, when it has me in it, just the first edition. There's a Scottish Presbyterian pastor called David Robertson. He read Richard Dawkins' earth-trembling book, The God Delusion, and on his own church site he wrote a response to the first chapter, which had such a positive response, he decided to write a response to every chapter in The God Delusion, which got published, the Dawkins Letters, and somebody put a link, somebody mentioned this book on the Richard Dawkins site. And that's where it all started happening. The thing is that if you're a real card-carrying Richard Dawkins atheist, you don't read Christian books. You've heard about them, you've got an idea what's in them, but you're not going to spend money on them, are you? You're not going to encourage this folly of religious belief by spending hard cash. And so a member of the site, Pamela Kirby, she took upon herself the responsibility to read the book and to give a kind of summary of the book so we could all insult it without having to read it. And she spent a lot of time and she gave a long summary of the book, and so of course we all started insulting it. The others more than me, okay, because I'm not really an insulting kind of person, you know. When you've got a face like mine, you can't go around insulting people. And one day, somebody posted a response, and the pseudonym was The Wee Flea. Now, the Wee Flea, in fact, was a pseudo of David Robertson himself. He had come into the discussion to defend what was being said about his book. Thought, brave man. And he was criticized and criticized point by point, and he kept coming back and he kept coming back. He said that even sometimes he would get up 2 hours earlier in the morning to give full responses to the criticisms of all that he'd said. And what was astonishing was that he was really persistent, he was really polite, he hardly ever insulted anybody. Obviously he insulted a bit. I mean, he's Scottish, you know, what do you expect? You don't get born Scottish and never insult anybody, do you? Particularly an Englishman. But he insulted people with considerable grace and forgiveness. And of course that just added fuel to the fire. The discussions got more and more heated. The insults got more and more violent. In fact, there was a very, very bad moment when somebody jokingly suggested that he could perhaps be assassinated the next time he went to Ireland. That was a really bad taste joke. And that almost got the discussion shut down. And then somebody said, and of course everybody knows that David Robertson is a liar. Now bear in mind, I've read 50, 60 pages of comments from all the members of the Richard Dawkins site and David Robertson's response, and I haven't seen any trace of a lie. But somebody said, everybody knows David Robertson is a liar. So I made the mistake of posting, could somebody please point out to me where David Robertson has told a lie? And of course I got all these loving, tender responses. Get yourself a life. Get over yourself. You dummy you. Can't you read?
Don't have a good one.
Sorry?
Don't have a good one.
I shouldn't have said that. I think I've started a movement. This is definitely going to be a movement. And then one day, somebody posted a piece of information on the site. You probably don't remember. It was in 2007. It was in the news. Some Russian prophet who was completely crazy, who had isolated a group of followers in a cave because he knew that the world was going to come to an end at a certain date. The world apparently didn't come to an end at that date, and he tried to kill himself by hitting himself over the head with a piece of wood. And I thought, it's a grotesque kind of thing to do. But of course all these atheists thought this was hilarious, and two of them said, what a pity he didn't finish the job. I thought, now that is going too far. To wish somebody dead, that is going beyond a joke. And I said so. And one of the most brilliant members of the site quoted my post and just added after it, LOL. Because I wanted to defend some kind of principle regarding the sacredness of human life, laughing out loud. What a joke. It was at that point that I thought perhaps it was not the kind of place that I wanted to be. I need, in all honesty, to add a piece of information which I have never added in my story before. This will be the first time. Many have guessed it. This is the first time that I say it publicly. When I was a Mormon, obviously I'd read the Bible a lot. I'd learned off by heart lots of verses from the Bible. So somewhere in my unconscious mind I had bits of Bible floating around. That was 30 years beforehand. And I kept on reading these posts on this site, and I kept on thinking, you shall know them by their fruits. What are these rotten fruits here that are coming out? Obviously you can't generalize. You can't say all atheists are rotten fruit, because on this site some of them are saying nasty things. But it seemed to me that what was coming out of this site was not an oasis of clear thinking. It was something a little unpleasant, to say the least. And so I decided to leave the site, and I thought about this guy, David Robertson, day after day getting up early just to reply, just to defend himself. Sometimes he would start his post by saying, I've just read all your criticisms, I think I've lost the will to live. But he carried on anyway, he just answered. And I wrote to him and I said, David, I want you to know I've finished with this site. I'm sorry, I find you've been really polite, I admire you for what you've done, but I cannot believe. If anybody here has ever been an atheist, you will understand that. You don't try not to believe, you just can't believe. It just doesn't seem logic. I knew all the explanations for belief in God. God as the ultimate alpha figure, the father figure, the need for security. I knew the evolutionary explanations for God. The fact that the brain can attribute agency to things is an evolutionary strategy. And so the brain attributed agency to all kinds of things. The rain, the thunder, etc. etc. I knew all that. I couldn't believe in God. But I wanted to say, David, you're a nice guy. I appreciate you. Apparently, when he received that, he wasn't sure whether I was sincere or not, because he had received a lot of emails from people pretending to be nice to him, just hoping to get a reply back and go running back to their atheist website. Look what I made David Robertson say. And so he just replied back to me and said, thank you for your message. You say that you don't believe in God because you can't believe in God. 2 questions. Why don't you believe in God? What could make you believe in God? Okay. I got this email early on the morning of April the 12th, 2008. It was a Saturday. So what I did was, I opened the site and I printed out every page of every post of this discussion, trying to look for flaws that I could find in David Robertson's explanations, looking at the accusations of the atheists to see if they were true or not. And I went out and sat out on the balcony overlooking the Pyrenees with my coffee, and I went through page after page of this discussion. Nothing showed me that there was anything wrong with this guy, apart from obviously a clear mental deficiency because he believed in God, but he was nice all the same. And so I went back to this email. I thought, well, I've got to reply to these questions. And now I'm not joking, we're at 24 minutes past 10 on Saturday morning, the 12th of April, 2008. Question: why don't you believe in God? That's a dumb question. What could make you believe in God? Certainly not logic and proof and reason. I didn't think that answer out at all. That which had been precious to me for years, logic and proof and reason, certainly not. And in that instant, my mind exploded. If you've ever heard the expression of an amazing grace experience, that was it. Why do I know what time it was? Because when that happened to me, I wasn't sure whether I was having a serious psychological breakdown. Just for a second I thought, I need to keep track of this. But it wasn't. It was the most incredible experience, which I cannot describe to you, which I cannot share with you. An image which I've used, which has spoken to some people, was that I'd seen the universe fairly clearly in black and white and in 2 dimensions. But all of a sudden, it was in 3 dimensions and it was in full color. It just beamed out at me. And words which I must have memorized years beforehand came into my mind, and I tremble as I repeat them to you now. From the Bible, the Christian Bible, I don't know if you read it. We can love because He loved us first. Yes, of course. That's what it's all about. It's all about love. And it's not about my ability to love Him. It's because He loved me first, and He gave me freely this love that everything opened up. I promise you, my life changed in that instant, and talking about it today is as thrilling and as exciting as it was 3 years ago. I wrote back to him and I said, this has happened to me, to David Robertson. He didn't believe me. He said, okay, tell me about it. And so I did. And then in my over-enthusiasm, I made the mistake of going back to the Richard Dawkins site and of telling them. And as a result of that, I received the best compliment I think I've ever had in my life. I'm not a very clever bloke. I'm reasonably obedient. In spite of being handsome, I'm not actually particularly intelligent. And this very, very brilliant scientist, philosopher wrote, Richard, we cannot trust you anymore. How you can go to Christianity after a full knowledge of all the philosophical and scientific explanations proving that it is false. I thought, wow, I had a full knowledge. I thought I'd better not tell my ex-wife's lawyer. In fact, as time has passed, I realize now that as I listen to atheists speaking and reasoning against religion, I have to say, well, yeah, I know where you're coming from. Not only do I understand what you're saying, but I've said it myself. I understand that perfectly. Absolutely. If you want to look down through a microscope into the philosophy books and the science books, that's all right. It's just that God has allowed me to look up, and all of a sudden, everything changes. Obviously, people ask me questions like, well, how do you know it was a Christian God?